Hi everybody, my name is Mike Parsons. I'm the Marketing Director for Universum in Asia Pacific. I hope everybody is doing well. Thank you for joining us. I think we've got a really great session lined up for today. Across the next 40 minutes or so, we're going to be taking a deeper look at attracting top talent in India and some things to consider when addressing your employer brand. Loosely, the session is going to look at what talent in India want from their career and their employer, as well as some other insights from this year's student and professional talent surveys that were rolled out in India, and also some things you might want to consider when managing your employer brand. The people that will take you through this short journey are Universum's very own Risha Malhotra and Pratik Serbawal, both of whom work with and advise many of the world's largest employers on talent attraction strategy and employer branding, so they know their stuff, so you're in safe hands. Before I hand things over, just want to remind you all to use the question feature to send in your questions as we go along. At the end, Risha, Pratik, and I will try and get through as many of the questions as we can in the given time. If there's anything we don't have time for, though, please reach out to us privately. I'll provide our contact details in the follow-up after the session. And of course, within that follow-up, we'll include a recording of the session and links to the other materials and reports. So no need to worry about those things. But please do give us a day or two to get everything uploaded. So that'll be 24 to 48 hours until you get everything's through to you. So, okay, that's all from me. I'll hand over to Risha.
Hi, everyone. This is Risha here. So I'll firstly walk you through the agenda for today. So we have it divided in two parts. So the first part is going to be, I'm going to introduce Universum to most of you who are not that familiar with what we do and what it is about. And then I will move on to the insights which I think all of you are really waiting to hear about, how the students and the professionals are different when it comes to India. What do they prefer? What is their behavior? We'll be looking at the differences in terms of the educational background and also what happens when it comes to the gender. Do males have different preferences than females in terms of the attractive employer? And then we would also be looking at something really interesting, which is India versus the region. So we would be looking at how India is different and unique when it comes to the talent preferences given from China or from Singapore, and why we need to have a differentiated strategy. And then the second part of today's webinar is going to be about employer branding. What is employer branding? Why you should be thinking about it and why you should start working on it. So Pratik would walk you through the approach, how you can approach it strategically, and also we would be talking about employer value proposition, how you can develop it and why it is the essence of your employer brand. Okay, so let's start with some data-led, purposeful and human employer branding. So moving on, let me start with who we are. So Universum, we are the global leaders in employer branding. We cover over 60 markets around the world where we do the talent survey, and we also advise the companies on how they can form a strong employer brand. And we are partnering with over 1,700 clients globally, from the local champions to the global MNCs. So we are working with all of them. And we are also, so what we essentially do when it comes to employer branding is that a lot of people and the companies know us that we do the rankings, and we take out the rankings in terms of which employer is more attractive than the other. But that is just the tip of the iceberg, I would say. We are an employer branding firm, and we help you with the whole journey of employer branding in terms of tackling what are the challenges that you're facing within the company to get the best quality talent and to reach your objectives. We are doing all of that. So we help in the whole journey of employer branding and talent acquisition to the companies. So let's look at a bit more in detail where all we are present. So what you see right now on the slide is all of the countries that we are present in. So so these are the figures for 2016. We operated and did the survey in 57 different countries across the world, and we covered 1.3 million talent, which is the largest talent survey in the world. And we have some of the well-renowned and reputed media partners across the world. Some of them are Forbes, The Economist, And CNN Money is our trusted global media partner and also our trusted partner in India. So whenever we do the rankings, the student rankings or professional rankings or any other research paper, that is definitely published by CNN Money, or they write about it. So this is just to give you a sense of how big we are and where all we operate. And now I would be moving on to the next part, which is talking about the insights about what is the difference between the Indian students and the Indian professionals. So the data that we will be covering today is based on the statistics that you see on the slide. So the student set is 29,448. This is the number of students on which the data for today is based on. And for the professionals, it is 7,303. So you can see that so if I break it down in terms of how many came from engineering and IT and how many came from business and commerce. So in terms of the students' data, approximately 20% came from business and commerce background, and for engineering and IT, it was 52%, which I think is very representative of the Indian talent, given that a lot of students go into engineering as a educational as a choice of their as a career. And then for professionals, we would see that approximately 15% are coming from business or commerce background, and the rest, which is and 55% is coming from engineering and IT. So again, it's a bit heavy on engineering and IT in terms of students and professionals. Now let's move on and look at what are the career aspirations and what are the career goals of the Indian talent, and how does it differ when we are talking about the students and the professionals. So if we look at the data of the career goals, we would see that the top 3 career goals for the students is, number 1 is to have an international career, and the second is to have work-life balance, and the number 3 is to be secure or stable in my job. Whereas if you look at the professionals, the first 2 are same, which is to have a work-life balance and to have an international career. But the third one is to be entrepreneurial or creative or innovative. So the difference that we really see in students and professionals is that students are looking for an employer that can provide them with more stability in their job, whereas the professionals are actually looking to work in a more creative environment, to be given more responsibility and to work as an entrepreneur within the organization. Or maybe they want to become an entrepreneur themselves as a career. So this is the difference, but to just elaborate on that, if we look at the percentages in terms of how attractive to be entrepreneurial is as a career goal to the students and professionals, it is actually the same percentage. But if we look at the stability and the security in my job, we would see that students, surprisingly, which I think stability is something that the professionals usually we associate with them because they have families, they have more responsibilities, and probably it is a career goal for them to be more stable and secure in the job, but actually it is the students who are looking for more stability. So that's a surprising insight, I would say there. But that does not mean that they're not looking to be creative or innovative, but they definitely do value more stability in the job. And if you look at some more differences in terms of the biggest gap when it comes to the career goals among the students and professionals, we would see to have work-life balance is one of the biggest gaps. So as we see that work-life balance is important to both the students and professionals, but it is definitely way more important to the professionals. They regard it way higher than the students. And then if you look at being autonomous or independent, that was another career goal where we saw was the biggest gap in terms of students and professionals. So the students are looking for jobs or career that can give them more autonomy in their work and be more independent. So these are kind of the subtle differences that we are seeing when it comes to the career aspirations among students and professionals. Another thing that I would highlight here is that in India, international career is definitely the top goal for the students. But if we look at the gender difference, we would see that females are actually preferring to have a more international career than the males. And surprisingly, also looking at the data, females tend to have more experience in international experience when it comes to their career. So moving on, let's go on to the next slide. So this one, I'm going to spend some time here and explain you this framework that we have. This is a Universum framework, and this is important to understand so that you are able to get a better sense of the data that I will be sharing in the coming slides with you. It would be based on this particular framework. So I would tell you to focus on the colors here. So there are 4 color blocks, which is orange, blue, green, and black. So they're all 4 color blocks are the drivers for employer branding attractiveness. The orange one is referring to the employer brand and reputation, and the blue one is people and culture, which talks more about the social environment or the work culture of the employer. Then the green one is remuneration and advancement opportunities, which is more referring to what are the monetary benefits or which are provided by the employer currently and also in the future. And then the last one is the black one, which is job characteristics, which is talking about the more hard aspects of the job in terms of what are the responsibilities, how challenging is the work, and what exactly is in terms of the contents and demands of the job. So these are the 4 different drivers, and each driver has 10 different attributes associated with it. And so that makes it a 40 attribute framework, and I would be referring back and forth onto the colors. So remember the color codes. Orange is employer reputation and image, blue is people and culture, and green is for the compensation and benefits, and the black one is job characteristics. So let's see how we are going to be using this framework and to read the data that we have. Okay, so let's look at this one. So this is actually referring to the talent preferences. So what makes an employer attractive to the students, and what makes an employer attractive to the professionals, and how different are these preferences if you look at the Indian talent. So if you look at the students, so what you can see is these are the top 10 attributes among each the students and professionals, and each of them again are color coded. So you can see like blue, creative and dynamic work environment. This is coming from the blue driver, which was the people and culture. Then this is high future earnings coming from the green one, and similarly you can see for the rest in professionals and in students. So if we look at all of the data and do a comparison, we would see that the difference or the unique things lies here. So for the professionals, they are actually looking for leaders who will support my development. They're looking for an employer that can provide them with flexible working conditions. They're looking for recognition in terms of their work and career, and they're looking for challenging work in the workplace. So these are the 4 things that we saw were standing out in terms of what is different from students versus the professionals. And you can see clearly there are more of the blue attributes which are here. So it just gives us the sense that the professionals are looking for more softer aspects of the job. They're really looking for what is in there for me when I'm going there. What is the workplace like? What is going to be my job actually? They're not really concerned, or they do not are not prioritizing the employer reputation that much, but they're really looking at what is there for me in the job. And if we have to look it down in terms of the percentage that how it changes from student to professionals from each driver, we would see that people and culture, it was 20%. If you look at the top 10 preferences for student, it moves to 40%, so which is almost double. So people and culture aspects are definitely more important for professionals. And similarly, we would see that employer reputation and image goes down, which is only 10% of the top 10 preferences. So this is something that we see that professionals are, as they become mature, as they get more experience, they want to really know about the job, they want to know about the work culture, and as a talent acquisition person or as an HR person, everybody who is currently listening to me, I would say that you should be thinking really about when you're doing the communication. I think gone are the days when we have to focus on the heritage of the company, or how old is the history of the company, or we really need to be talking about the intangible aspects also in terms of what you can provide to them for their career advancement. So moving on, let's look at the talent preferences and break them down in terms of the educational background. And let's see that how does an educational background really create a difference in the preferences. So here we are comparing engineering and IT student and professionals, and then we will be comparing business and commerce students and professionals. So firstly, to start with, if we look at, let's break this down by looking at the students first. So if you look at the students coming from the engineering and IT background, and if you look at the students coming from the business and commerce background, you would see that there's not much difference. 3 out of the 4 things actually match. And this is not the whole data. These are only the insights that we have really brought about, which really brought home the fact that how they are different from each other. So you would see that in students and professionals, the only thing that is different from engineering student is looking for challenging work, whereas a business and commerce student is looking for secure employment. So these were the only 2 differences that we saw. But if you look at the professionals of engineering and IT and business and commerce, again, we would see that there is not too much of difference, which goes on from based on the educational background. But we can see that a professional from engineering and IT background, he still retains the challenging work preference, I would say, even when the person was a student and even after becoming a professional, that is still important to them to have challenging work. Whereas for the professionals of business and commerce, they are looking for good reference for future career. So they really want employers that can provide them a good name to have good career advancement in the future. So these are some of the differences that you see. But overall, if we look at this whole scenario here, we would see that students in general do not differentiate that much from each other given the education background, but there is a stark difference if you look at student compared to a professional. So we can safely say that the experience really affects the preferences of the talent more than the educational background. Though there are subtle differences, but there is a stark difference in terms of the experience that creates the difference in their minds on what they're looking for. So moving on, let's look at how does the gender now, how does a female want different things from an employer compared to a male. So let's look at that. And now again, I would be going through each of the 4 different drivers and see that what really came about as differentiating. So if we look at the first one, which is the orange one, which was the employer reputation and image, we would see that market success and other attributes which come under employer reputation and image are more important to the male students compared to female students or compared to the professionals. This is something which really stood out, that if you are talking to the male students or you're trying to kind of correct, I would say, the gender ratio within your company, I think it is really important to know the subtle differences and what would attract a male student or a female student or a female and male professional. And then if you look at the people and culture, we would see that leaders who will support my development is something which is important to the males, regardless of the fact that they are a student or a professional. So they're really looking, when a male is coming into an organization, they're really looking to see that their superiors or their boss or their manager is really giving them that kind of a conducive environment where they can grow, they can develop themselves, they can develop their skills. And then if we look at the green one, which is the remuneration and advancement opportunities driver, we would see that good reference for future career is something which was important to both the male and female students, but this is not important to the male professionals. So it is something that really attracts the students, but when it comes to the male professionals, it might not be something that they're looking for. They're looking for something which is more challenging work, which brings me on to the next driver, which is the job characteristics, the black one here. So we would see that females, definitely they have probably they're seen as having family and more responsibilities, and they're looking for, especially in India where females tend to be the one really managing the families, they're looking for flexible working conditions. So it is important to both males and females, but definitely there's a very strong preference among the females to have flexible working conditions. And then finally, the males prefer challenging work, which I also mentioned previously in the green one. So the males are really looking for challenging work, be it students or be it professionals, they're looking to have challenging work. And flexible working conditions was something that was actually not seen as a top preference by men in be it they were a student or a professional. but females definitely, as we see, they really give importance to that. So if when you're talking to the female talent and you're talking about flexible working conditions, that would really strike a chord with them. So let's move on and let's look at some of the industry preferences for the students here. So we are comparing the industry preferences according to the educational background, be it business or commerce or engineering or IT. So there are not too many surprises here. We can see that banks, auditing and accounting, management and strategy consulting, all of these are the top ones when it comes to business and commerce. Whereas when it comes to the engineering talent, they're looking for aerospace and defense, or they're looking for software and computer services, these kind of industries to be working in. So to break it down, the top 3 industries for business and commerce students is banks, auditing and accounting, management and strategy consulting. So these are the top 3 for business commerce, and then engineering and IT, aerospace and defense, which I think was surprising because also when we do the rankings and we see that a lot of students actually put in nominations to be working for NASA or to be working for space research organizations. So I think they're really, aerospace and defense is something which is definitely seen as extremely attractive by the Indian talent coming from the engineering and IT background. Then software and computer services and automobiles and parts. So these are the top 3 for industries for engineering and IT. Not too many surprises, I think. I think those are definitely conventional industries given the background of the students. And the public sector and government agencies are also in the top for both, so which I think still stays as much as India is becoming more and more MNCs are entering the workplace. The government agencies and the public sector still is retaining its importance, so it's still not up there, but it's still one of the top industries where students want to work in. Now let's look at India versus the region. So firstly, we would be comparing India with Singapore, and this is based on the students' data. This is based on what the students think and what is their preference coming to an employer. So this is something which we saw earlier, the Indian students, what they want from their employer. So they want creative and dynamic work environment, high future earnings, innovation. So we see there are a lot of, it's a mixed bag of all the 4 drivers here, from employer reputation and image to people and culture to remuneration and job characteristics, the 4 ones, just so you don't forget or you haven't forgotten them. So let's compare it to Singapore, which is a knowledge economy, which is a developed country, and how different it is when it comes to the students here, what they want from their employer. So we can clearly see, for the benefit of you all, I've highlighted the differences here. As you can see, in Singapore, they're looking for clear path for advancement. They want an employer that respects its people. They want an employer that can provide them a workplace where the leaders will support their development and their performance is recognized. So something which, if you can recall from our previous slides, we saw that the Indian professionals are also seeking leaders who will support my development, and they're also seeking recognition. So we can it's fair to say that the Singaporean students probably are already thinking from an experience viewpoint. They already are wanting the things which the Indian professionals are seeking. So they're already ahead in terms of wanting more softer aspects from their employers. So as you can see, the people and culture aspect is very strong within Singapore. So we can see that how, being within the same region, the talent is totally different in terms of what they want from their employer. Now let's see a comparison with China, which is another populated country with a lot of students there wanting to work with the MNCs or wanting to make a great career. So if you look at India, it remains the same that we saw earlier. Let's look at China here now. Then how does that differentiate? So again, recognition for performance was something that we see which is consistent. We also just saw that it was also important to the Singaporean talent. Then clear path was for advancement, again something we saw for Singapore also, which is not the same as the students in India. Then something which is unique to China, and I think this is interesting for some of you which are coming from the global companies here and are listening in or are working for around the region. It's important to see the differences among the talent and what they prefer. So you would see for China, attractive or exciting products is something very important to the Chinese talent, and enabling to integrate my personal interest, and then sponsorship of future education, something extremely different from what we saw from Singapore or India. So that's with the Chinese talent. And if we compare it with India and we look at how this information can be used by you when creating a strategy for India, is that the Indian talent is definitely looking for different things. It has a mind of its own. We are still in the stage where it's a developing economy. The changes are still happening, so it is still a mix, and it's the rate at which the change is happening in terms of the mindset is also very fast. So the companies also need to adapt to that. And I think the thing that we saw here in terms of both, if you look at the region, is that it is important to see that the companies tend to sometimes just look at the global value proposition and think that we should just adapt it directly. But it is very important to adapt it locally and look at the market that you are operating in. And now we'll move on to the second part, which is why employer branding and how can we effectively use the insights that we just shared with you. So let's look at employer branding. So I think we have been saying employer branding a lot. We have been talking about it, that you should start working on it, but why? Why is, I'm sure, the question going on in your mind, why we should really start working on it. So here are some of the reasons that you should work on employer brand. So these are some of the data points coming from research, and not just these are not just made up by anyone. These are coming from research. So you can see if your employer brand is strong, you can actually have savings of 50% per hire. You can have lower turnover rates for up to 28%. And for the management also, it is a good thing in terms of the rate of return. You can increase your revenue by 2.4 times and your profit by 1.8 times. So these are real data points that actually reflect that how an employer brand can affect the whole organization. Now let's look at why we should look at, in this day and age, why it has become all the more imperative to be working on employer branding. So if you look at the first data point here, we would see that the war for talent in terms of 2006 and 2007 was at 41%, whereas 41% of the employers said that they are having difficulties in hiring good quality talent. And then with the 2008 crisis, it just went down, and then there was more supply of talent, and the global war was still kind of a bit down. But now in the recent years, the companies are again finding it difficult to find good quality talent, and it's reaching back to its all-time high, which was before the crisis. So again, people are finding difficulties, and only your employer brand can help you differentiate yourself and get that top talent from your competitors. And also, if you look at this figure, we can see that more and more CEOs, so in 2015, 73% of the CEOs are concerned about getting the right talent with the right skills for the right job. And 59% of the companies are now investing more in their employer brand if you look at what they did last year. So there are a lot of companies out there getting all of their ammunition ready to get on this war for talent. And the companies who are currently not working on it, I think it's a wake-up call for them that they should start, otherwise they would be the laggards. And now if you look at this slide, this is again to show you that India is actually 77% is the fact that 77% of the companies are seeing employer branding as a top priority in India. So they've started the work, some are in the middle of the work, and they're all going to come out with their strategies in terms of getting the top talent. So it is important for the companies now to start in India to thinking about it. And now I would give over to my colleague Prateek, who will be taking you through the employer branding for the rest of the part.
Thank you, Risha. Hello, everyone. So basically, we saw some insights from Risha about how the Indian talent differs as compared to the region. We saw why is employer branding important. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about what are the considerations you should keep in mind when how to go about managing your employer brand. But before I dive into that, let me start with understanding what really employer branding is. And I'll start with the definition. So employer branding really, it's a process of promoting your company or an organization as the employer of choice to your desired target group obviously the purpose of which is to attract the right talent and retain the right talent. So once you have a strong employer brand, it will facilitate your ability to attract the right talent, retain the right people, and obviously you would have an engaged workforce that would help you achieve your business goals in a better manner. Putting it in a little bit in a business sense, just like companies do product marketing to market their products towards the consumers, employer branding is the exercise of marketing yourself as an employer towards the target talent, be it the students, the professionals, because now the talent market is so competitive that we have to sell ourselves as an employer to attract the right talent and the best talent. And why we say it as a journey is because an employer branding is something that you do not do alone. Not just because this is not just a one-step exercise, but an ongoing routine that you have to manage your employer brand throughout the life cycle, but it's also because an employer brand is not what you believe it is. It's not about what the HR or what a few people within the organization believe this is our employer brand. The employer brand really is what other people are saying about you. What are they talking about you as an employer? What are the students saying about you? What are the professionals? And most importantly, what are our employees saying about us as an employer? So that is why it's very important that when you are doing your employer branding, it is important to understand as well as engage the right stakeholders, that is the students, the professionals, and most importantly, your employees. Right, so now that we've understood what an employer brand is, I'm going to talk about how can we manage our employer brand. Before we start about managing the employer brand, we have to understand that irrespective of whether you are working actively with your employer brand or not, everyone has an employer brand. Even if I don't work at an organization, I would have some sort of an understanding and some sort of a perception, what is it like to work there? So that perception obviously could be correct or incorrect, but I would have some sort of idea. So irrespective of whether you're communicating or not, through different sources, people do have some idea about what you are as an employer. However, it's important that you translate, you communicate the correct understanding of who you are as an employer. You should communicate the right things about yourself, your most unique aspects, and that is part of managing your employer brand. Your employer brand has both an internal and external perspective. Now, this is one of the common mistakes people make when they are managing or working with their employer brand, thinking that the employer brand is only relevant when it comes to attracting the right talent. Well, it is important, but on the other hand side, it's also important to retain your right talent. And a strong employer brand definitely it goes a long way in engaging your talent, and it helps them in retention. And research shows that companies which had a stronger employer brand, they obviously had more engaged workforce, their attrition rates were lower, and they definitely had stronger business performance as compared to the companies which did not have an engaged workforce. Having said all that, how can we really influence the employer brand? Because as I mentioned, employer brand is something that you have irrespective of whether you're working actively with it or not. But to work actively with it, obviously, we have to make sure that we communicate more about who we are as an employer. And what should we really communicate about ourselves? There are 10 things that you could talk about yourself as an employer, about your culture, about the growth opportunities, the benefits, the kind of leaders we have. So what is it that we should really talk about ourselves as an employer? And that is where the concept of an employer value proposition comes in, which is a set of offerings which really defines the core of who you are as an employer. It's basically, every organization has a set of offerings, but you may be having those two things that you do better than all of the other peers in the industry or even other industries. So it's really unveiling what is it that you're really awesome at, really great at, and bringing that into your communication so that you stand out amongst talent and talent knows you for those right things, for your best things. And lastly, employer branding, it is more science than it seems than actually people think about. Even though branding traditionally was not very data-driven, but now as in marketing, we see branding has become much more data-driven. Similarly, employer branding also is very much data-driven. And with a thorough understanding of the different stakeholders, internally and externally, you can develop a strong employer value proposition, which will eventually enable you to create a compelling, sustainable, and effective employer brand. So now that we've seen that how can you work around managing your employer brand, I'm going to put a little bit more highlight around what are the different phases of employer branding. Obviously, there's the strategic aspect of it and there's the operational aspect of it. But broadly, this is the approach that we use while working with employer branding, and it can be broadly classified into 4 different areas. So starting in a clockwise direction, starting with the right-hand side, is obviously the first phase, which is about understanding the talent, understanding the key stakeholders, because before you embark on a journey of a strategy and communication, you have to really understand what's going on in the market. Once you've done the understanding, it's about using all of those insights to craft the strategy. I mean, as Risha just showed you a lot of insights, those are all great insights, but how do you really bring all those insights together into crafting an employer brand strategy? That is where it's very important to make sure that you're covering all bases of your insights, you're covering the right stakeholders, and utilizing all that information into crafting the right strategy. Once you have the strategy, it's about understanding, how can I communicate this to the right talent, to the right channels, using the right content, the right stories. An employer brand, as long as it's just a strategy, it's just a piece of book lying in a shelf. But you have to really talk about your employer brand. You have to make noise on the right channels, give them the content that people would be engaged with. So it's also about translating what really the strategy is into something, the content, what resonates with the talent. And lastly, about the KPIs and the measurements. So you are making a lot of investment in terms of your time and money when you are doing this employer branding journey. So it's important that after you have done the first 3 phases, that is the understanding, the crafting of your strategy, and communication about who we are as an employer, it's important that you track the performance. There are different levels of KPIs that you can track to understand what is the ROI of my investment, how strong or weak is my employer brand, how does it compare to the competitors, and eventually how is it leading in terms of my recruitment goals. So this is a journey that we work with clients. Obviously, the strategic part is more about understanding the talent, that is what is important to them, what is important to your employees, and what is the vision of the management leaders. And then the other aspect is about communication and the operational aspects of it. So I'm going to go a little bit deeper into one of these aspects, which is really after you have the insights, you develop the strategy. How do you bring those strategy in? How do you develop those insights into developing a strategy is what I'm going to talk about. So I mentioned a little while back about employer value proposition, also known as the EVP. And EVP is something that is very important towards managing, influencing your employer brand in the right direction. And this is one of the key concepts in employer branding. So even if the other things you've forgotten, I would just emphasize these are the 5 things that you should definitely remember when you're embarking on your journey to employer branding is how can we ensure that we have a strong and successful EVP. An EVP is, before I go into enlightening the criteria, an EVP is also about being focused. An EVP is not about talking about 10 things that we can offer at par with other organizations, but it's talking about the 2 or the 3 things that we do better than most of the other organizations. And being focused, it becomes extremely important given the fact that the attention span of the talent is reducing. So as long as we make sure that we have a consistent and a strong EVP that we are communicating through the right channels, it will definitely help to influence your employer brand in the right direction. So now I'm going to define what makes an EVP successful and how can you craft an EVP that will really help you achieve your business and your talent aspirations. So the first aspect is true. Your employer value proposition has to be the reality. It cannot be something that you are not able to deliver upon. It has to be something that your employees believe is what we can offer as an employer. Taking an example, if it is something that you say in your communication, for example, companies say, oh, we are an innovative company. It's a very strong concept. You make creative content around it and you start communicating it. However, if you're not innovative, if your employees feel that we're not innovative, that might create an initial traction amongst talent, amongst external talent. But when they join in, they would feel the missing piece. Well, this is not an innovative company to work for. So it's very important that we stick to the reality. What is it that we can really offer as an employer? And that is what our employer value proposition should include. The second aspect is the sustainable aspect. The EVP should be in line with what the strategy for the company is. Definitely, it's important to engage the business, the management stakeholders, understanding what is the aspiration for the company in the next 3 to 5 years. What is it that they really want to be positioning ourselves as, not just from a talent perspective, but also from a business perspective. What are the values that we have within the company? So all that is also a very important piece when we define the EVP. The most important aspect, the most important pillar of defining a successful employer value proposition is you have to understand what is attractive. What is attractive not just to the internal talent, that is the employees, but also to the students, the professionals. What is it that they really find important? What is it that they really look forward to when choosing an employer? Obviously, I mean, if you talk something that is not relevant to the employer, to the talent, it would not create a lot of resonance with the talent. It has to be credible. That means it should not be too different of what your image is externally in the minds of the talent. So taking an example, if management consulting firms start saying that, oh, we are the best work-life balance provider within the industry, it would be something very difficult for talent to believe upon, because management consulting firms are usually not associated with work-life balance. It's associated with long hours. So your EVP should not be something that's totally away from what you are being perceived as. And lastly, and often which is the most difficult part to achieve, is your EVP should be distinct in one way or the other. It should differentiate you from others. And we'll talk a little bit more about how you can differentiate yourselves in a few slides. But before I go into talking about the differentiation aspects, there is one question that commonly comes across in the employer branding journey. Is like, well, we already have a global EVP because we are a global MNC and our headquarters have EVP. They have provided us with the guidelines. We already have, clear, concise CVP that we should use. So the question that we often get is, do we need a global EVP that we can just use, or should we have a separate EVP for India or a separate EVP for every market? What is the right answer to this? So the answer really lies between having a balance between consistency as well as relevancy. Consistency to your global EVP as well as relevancy to the local market. And as we saw, there were a lot of insights that Risha pointed up about how the markets differ. Even within markets, we saw how students and the professionals within India differ. So you have to take all those factors into account when you are really targeting your communication towards your EVP. So taking this as an example, this is a global EVP. Let's say it has 4 pillars, the ones that you see here. Now, when you are localizing your EVP, it's important that you have to tailor your message locally. So taking it as an example in everyday language, it's about if you have your global EVP defined as different shades of color. So if you have 3 shades of like red, blue, and green as your global EVP, when you are communicating in India, you have to still have those 3 colors, red, blue, and green, but different shades of red, blue, and green that are more resonating with talent in India. And similarly, you have to take the differences of the market internally as well as externally to really craft what we call as the localized EVP. So in order to be effective everywhere, you do not need a new EVP. It still has to be the global EVP, but really, how can we add local flavor to the EVP that is relevant with the local audiences? That is something we can offer in the local market. So that is the process which we call as the localization of the EVP. And there's obviously, I can talk about this for hours, but in the interest of time, I would not go in depth about the localization approach. Coming back to, the differentiation aspect, and what I would highlight here now is some of the common pitfalls that companies fall into, even though they are doing quite a lot of the things right, but there are some common things that companies go wrong into when they are communicating about their employer brand. So I'll take an example. This is a communication from a leading bank which says that, welcome to a world of opportunities. It obviously sounds a very nice and creative statement, and I feel like, yeah, this would be something interesting. I would be attracted to it. But when I see that there are other banks saying, welcome to a world of opportunity, a world of opportunities, this side is your gateway to a world of opportunities, I see there is no differentiation. Looking at 10 seconds later, if I ask, world of opportunities, which bank was it? It would be very hard for the talent to remember which company was it that was talking about a world of opportunities. So even though it's a catchy statement, if it's not differentiating, it would not be resonating with the talent. It would not be holding value for a long period of time with the talent. So it's important to understand what is differentiating, what is your competitors' positioning, and you have to bring all of that, because and not only your industry competitors would be saying the same things, even companies in other industries are talking about similar things. So you have to really understand the competitive landscape in order to differentiate really from what your competitors are saying. And this is just one example. There are many other examples that companies have been, trying to differentiate but have failed in terms of differentiation. So innovation, it's a massive buzzword that everyone wants to use because it's a key thing talent wants. But really, innovation is in our DNA. How many times have we seen that? How much effect will that really have on the talent? And it's not just with the messages. It's also with what kind of images you show to convey the meaning to your talent. So taking this as an example, these are communication from 4 major banks. If I would remove the 4 logos here, I'm sure no one would be able to recognize which company is behind this communication. And as a matter of fact, talent has become so smart that they clearly recognize which are iStock images and which are real employee images. And they are actually quite repulsive to iStock images. So it's very important that you use your employees as your brand ambassadors to really showcase who we are as an employer, because that is what will make you credible in your offering. That is what will make the talent believe and give a sense of feeling. This is what it is like to work here. Your employees are your superheroes. They are your biggest brand ambassadors. So make sure that you bring them in your communication when you're communicating with the talent. And the differentiation really comes about, not just about what, but really the details lies in how you do it. So there are 7 to 8 things that every company would be talking about: innovation, growth, culture, leaders, etc. But then how do you talk about that? That is, how do we really live those values within the company? That's what makes all the difference. What kind of initiatives we have. And those real stories told by the employees using the real imagery leaves a much more lasting and a solid effect on the talent. So before we start with the questions, I would just leave you with this thought. So although this seems like a very long process and there's a lot of things that you need to take into account, but on the road to success, there are really no shortcuts.
Thanks a lot, guys. Okay, Mike, back again. Okay, so we've got time for a few questions, and we've had a few that have come in. So let me just read this first one. Amongst the 5 pillars of the EVP, is one pillar more important than the other, guys?
Great, excellent question. So as you saw, there were 5 pillars of the EVP: the true, sustainable, attractive, credible, and distinct. And yes, I would say there are some pillars that are more important than the others. Attractive one is the most important pillar because obviously that is something that you cannot influence. You have to just accept what the reality is within the market. You cannot influence the talent to really make them feel, well, innovation is what is important to you. You have to accept that. So you really have to understand and just accept it. While all the other pillars, that is the true, sustainable, credible, and distinct, are in your control through communication or through change management, you cannot influence what is attractive to talent. Credible is relatively less important given as compared to the other 4 pillars, because that is something that can be changed easily with communication. So even if I have an image about, let's say, a company ABC, once I start seeing communication that is different from what I have as my current perception, slowly and steadily over a period of time, my perception would change and be closer to the reality.
Okay, question here. Let me just read this one from Surab. I understand the intrinsic, extrinsic. Okay, so this must be relating to the framework. But how do you say that job characteristics are hard? Anyone explain what is meant there?
Right. So basically you see that there is the softer aspects, which is the cultural aspects, and then there is the hardware aspects, which are much more tangible aspects in terms of what are the kind of training offerings I would have, what is the kind of flexible conditions that are present in the conditions, what is the kind of security, has been the attrition and the retention rate, how many times has this company gone in reorganization changes over the last few years. So those are much more tangible aspects, like what we have for the remuneration advancement opportunities, something that can be defined as compared to culture or innovation.
Okay, thanks. So let's reading down here. How can employer branding help retain female employees? We still see that there are more dropouts from this group after a few years. What are your thoughts or observations?
Interesting question. And that is where, you really have to be specific and deep diving on those set of females that you feel have been dropping out. There must be some sort of trend. There must be some sort of rationale behind why they have been dropping out. So the answer would really, it would not be possible for me to just say, because every company is different, every talent group is different, but with specific research amongst those set of female employees, let's say within your organization, it would be possible to understand what were the triggering factors that led them to make a decision. Was it push factors that led them to move to another employer that they were unhappy about within their current employer? Or was it pull factors that really they found attractive after 2 or 3 years within their career that made them attract to another organization?
Yeah, and as we see, the data sets between male and female, there are differences. So if you have one group, male or females, a higher attrition rate in one, perhaps the reality is that your employment experience is more skewed towards what males would want than females. So again, look at the data, look at what the real employment experience is. If you have an EVP, does it match that EVP? And then you can look and see, well, is that more attractive to male or females from our target group? And yeah, so you can use the data to pretty much get your answer on this question. So, like Alex said, dive deep, look at the data, and you will find out.
Yeah, just to add to what Mike said here, I think the data that we share today, it's a lot of high-level data, and there's a lot of information there, but it's really looking at the market in general. But if you're facing this came from, so if you are really facing some problem which is specific to your company and specific to your target group, you need to understand within your target group, if you look at the females, what do they really want? And then you come back and then cross-check, is your organization is really standing for those things, or are you really providing your female employees with that? Are your current female employees happy? So I think there are a lot of things that can be taken into account, and then create that one workplace, as Mike said, and secondly also the communication, which is correct to get those employees, the female ones, to come and also stay within the company.
All right, guys, one last question. So the last question here is, are my company values the same as the EVP / how different or aligned is corporate brand from employer brand?
Okay, so let's address that one by one. I think there are 2 questions in there. So yes, to start with, give a simple answer. Values are different from employer value proposition, because values are something that really are defining of who we are as a company that addresses different stakeholders, not just the talent, but the investors, the customers, the people who have worked in the organization in the past, shareholders. So there are many different stakeholders when it comes to the values, and it really is a guideline of how we operate as a company. Whereas your employer value proposition is the set of offerings that really defines who we are as an employer, and talent is the main stakeholder here. It really is that how do we operate as a company? What can you expect when you are looking at this company? What can you expect? What is the kind of work environment? What is the kind of opportunities? So that is where the difference lies between values and employer value proposition. Obviously, there's some linkage between them, like the values do influence the EVP to some extent or the other, but yes, these are 2 separate things. What was the second one? About the difference between the corporate branding and the employer branding. So yes, that's again a frequent question that we do see amongst the clients. So corporate brand is again something that will be addressed to different stakeholders, to the consumers, to the stakeholders, whereas the employer brand is something that is addressed just to the talent, your employees as well as your target talent externally. Well, when we talk about, traditionally the corporate brand in itself was to an extent sufficient to attract the right talent. So companies with strong corporate brands, they were very effective in attracting the right talent for the presence of interesting products or a successful company to work for, etc. But now that the talent competition has intensified and companies have become much more strategic about who we are as an employer, that's where employer branding sets in. So even if, with a strong employer brand, you might be able to set in awareness that really we know this company, which is very common with FMCG companies, that people know them. but how many people really know them as employers? What is the kind of culture? What is the kind of development opportunities that this company offers? So the corporate brand will get you to a certain extent. That is, it will create some sort of awareness in the minds of talent. But to really drive that awareness into interest and making sure that this talent is engaged with me as an employer, you have to focus on your employer brand. You have to strengthen and communicate who you are really as an employer. And typically that's a challenge many FMCG companies face, that they have a very strong corporate brand, but the employer brand is something that they need to work more upon to really communicate who they are as an employer. And overall, when we're talking about the company's brand on the whole, obviously your employer brand stays under the overall brand umbrella of your organization. So that is why when we are developing the employer value proposition, we do look into like what your values are, what your overall brand and vision for the organization is.
Okay, all right, thanks a lot. Okay, guys, no more questions now. There are still some questions here. Some of them were a little incomplete, so if we didn't get around to answering your question, please do send it to us by replying to one of the follow-ups or taking the email addresses from there, which we'll share with you. So give us some time to upload the recording and the slides from today so that we can send you links to obtain all the information that you've seen today. We'll send that through to you in the next 24 to 48 hours, so that will be coming through. So don't be worried about that. Look, thanks a lot for joining us today and taking some time out of your busy days. We really appreciate that. If you want to keep the conversation going, so do we. So just drop us a line. And yeah, look, we hope to see you at the next one. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, everyone. Feel free to get in touch.